In this step, we're going to cut the coasters for your coaster box. Now, if you look at the edges of the boards that we've glued, planed, resawed, and planed again, you'll see that they're not quite even. Um, we need to cut it even first. So on the miter saw, make sure you take one of your boards, make sure it's pushed all the way back tight against the back fence here without pulling the trigger. Line it up so you're just shaving the thinnest amount possible off. Let it all the way up, and then cut that off. Now we have a square side on this part of the board, or this end of the board. Back on your table now and away from the miter saw, we need to mark out the width of your coaster. Now, we could measure this with a tape measure to make it square, but I found that that's a chance or a pretty high chance of error amongst eighth graders. So an easier way to do it is to take your other piece that you've resawn, line it up so it's totally even with this side that you cut square, then take your pencil and mark the line. Once you have this line cut, we'll take it over to the miter saw. Back on the miter saw now, we'll cut out your first coaster. Now this is important. The blade in the miter saw is 1/8 of an inch wide. So if we cut directly on the line, you're going to end up with a coaster that's anywhere between 1/16 and 1/8 of an inch too skinny. We want to make sure that the blade sits over here on the scrap side of the line. So again, without turning the saw on, I'm going to line it up so that the blade or the right edge of the blade is even with the line. I know it's hard to see here in the video, but the entire blade is on this side towards me of the line. Now I can let it up and cut through again. Repeat this process for the rest of your coasters. Now, oftentimes, students will take their board and mark 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 coasters right away and then try and cut. Don't do that. The width of the blade is 1/8 of an inch. So if you mark them all right away, rather than mark, cut, all of your coasters are going to end up being 1/8 of an inch too thin and they won't be square, too short and they won't be square. Okay. So mark it, then come back and cut. Go back to your table, mark, and then come back and cut. Do that for each of them. Now on the last coaster, when you're near the edge and your finger's getting close, we'll cut that on the bandsaw coming up. Okay, so you can see I've cut 4 of my 5 coasters here on the miter saw. Now this last one, there's only a thin amount of wood left and a short amount of wood here. This is too close for your fingers to beat to the miter saw blade. We're not going to cut our last one here. We'll cut the last one on the bandsaw. To cut our last coaster on the bandsaw, we first need to set the fence and the height of the blade guide. Let's start by setting the height of the blade guide. Take your remaining coaster piece, set it underneath the blade guide, let it down, and then tighten it up using the orange knob so that the blade guide is within 1/4 of an inch of your board. To set the fence, take your coaster piece and set it the long way so that the board just touches the blade as it passes through on the fence. Rotate your board so that the side you cut on the miter saw, the flat side, is against the fence. You can hold it here with one hand. I'm pulling it toward the fence as I cut, and then cut through on the bandsaw like this. Shut it off. Wait until it's done spinning. And then use the brush or the push stick to get the scraps out. Don't put your hands inside the black line. So now between the bandsaw and the miter saw, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 coasters that are all square and even in the same size. One more comment on the miter saw. If you'd rather make all of your cuts on the bandsaw, or maybe there's a long line by the miter saw and the bandsaw is open, feel free to make all your cuts on the bandsaw. You do need to make your first initial cut on the miter saw though, the cut that squares off one edge of the board. That's the only way to get a nice 90-degree angle on that side of your board.